What's up, everybody? You're listening to Lo-Fi Faith with Mike and James.
We're two guys who also happen to be pastors, doing our best to have open conversations about what it means to follow Jesus in today's world. Welcome back, everyone, to Lo-Fi Faith. We are in the studio once again and joined by James, my co-host. This is Mike. James, my friend, how are you doing?
Mike, my friend.
Well, you sound super sure about that one.
I just had to really think through all the implications of that word.
Yeah. Well, do we want to address that now?
No, I think we should move on quickly.
I kind of want to address it because you did not say that with a whole lot of conviction.
Look,
You sort of said, my friend.
I think I'm ready to use the term acquaintance.
Okay, so you want to take back the fact that you just called me a friend.
Well, that's why I was thinking about it.
Yeah. Well, let's start again.
I just don't want to move too fast.
James, my friend, how are you doing?
Mike, my acquaintance, I'm doing very well. I feel much more confident now.
Yeah, that's great. Right, I wanted you to feel like you're being genuine, right?
Yeah, I don't want to lie to you.
If you start off on a lie, then I feel like it's going to impact the rest of the discussion that we have.
Yeah.
So just to be clear, I consider you a friend.
Yes.
You consider me merely an acquaintance. I
am sorry that you had to find out this way. You kind of put me on the spot here, but
well, I mean,
yes, yeah. No, an acquaintance, like a really, really warm, very close acquaintance.
Yeah, well, I mean, that still honestly hurts. Now you're actually, you've got a background in mental health. As I'm feeling this pain and this kind of betrayal, to be honest.
Sure.
How should I process this and deal with it right now?
Yeah. As a therapist now.
Yeah.
I think what I would want to do is lead you to a place where you can sort of sit in that feeling of rejection and betrayal.
Okay.
And still be okay.
Yeah.
So I'm going to continue to call you an acquaintance, and you just, whatever comes up, whatever you feel in that moment, just let it be. Just sit in it.
So I've got this desire right now to kind of like strangle you.
Sure.
Is that something that you said I should just go with it? Right?
No, I didn't say you should act out on your behavior. I think you should just feel the emotion. So if the emotion is strangling and violence, honestly, we should probably dig down into what's behind that. Might actually be why I consider you an acquaintance instead of a friend.
Right.
I may be quite fearful of my life.
Okay. Yeah. Well, that to be fair, that would make some sense.
Yeah. So I feel like this has actually been a very healthy conversation.
Yeah, I feel good. Yeah. Like also murderously angry.
Yeah.
But like good. And you know what I mean?
Yeah, no, I feel better for having made this boundary, actually.
Yeah.
Now, this is a very revealing conversation.
Yeah, I'd want to make it clear I'm probably not going to stick to that boundary, but
no.
It's nice that we at least had the conversation.
Yeah.
Because I feel good about it. And yeah, I actually feel more at peace about the kind of thoughts that I'm having right now.
I'm actually feeling less and less at peace.
Yeah, well, that's not my concern.
Every second that I sit in the studio
I'm the patient here, so can we not make it about you're supposed to be the professional?
Yeah, I think at this point, this has been a great episode, everybody. I hope that you have a lovely day.
Hey, wait.
I've got to run. Follow Lo-Fi Faith with Mike and James on Instagram to keep up with new episodes, behind-the-scenes content, and to join in on the conversation.
Today we're going to have a discussion around the idea that there is some tension in terms of how involved should Christians be in the world. Jesus famously said to the disciples, "You are to be in the world, but not of the world." And today we want to discuss what does that actually mean practically in terms of Christians being involved in political issues, justice issues, that kind of stuff. You understand where I'm going with this, James?
Yeah, that kind of stuff. That little stuff.
You know what I mean?
I do know what you mean. I think that this is a very pertinent conversation. Anyone who is paying attention to the news at all recognizes that there is quite a bit going on in the world. In particular, in my home country, there is a lot happening that is, quite destabilizing. Right? There's a lot of tension there. And this is a very ongoing question, right? Like, how do we as a church navigate the realities of what a government might be doing, whether or not we agree with them, right? And there's a lot of ideas behind this. One side of it is like, well, we should be involved in everything. Like, we should always be we should be political. A Christian should be advocating for good politics. We might disagree on what that looks like, though. The other side is we should not be involved at all in politics or anything that might be considered a political issue.
Yeah.
It detracts from our work.
Yeah. It's a distraction.
It's a complete distraction. And then maybe there's some middle ground where people say, well, we should get involved on some issues, but not others. And then it gets real sticky as to which ones. And we actually tend to betray our own politics by deciding which ones are worth getting involved in, me included, right? But I do think this is a very important question, because when you are faced with injustice anywhere around the world, right? The question is, what is my moral, ethical, legal responsibility as a Christian? Not legal. How should I actually respond? Or how should we as a church respond?
Yeah, I know. I get where you're coming from. I mean, a question that came to my mind as you were speaking is like, is it ever wrong as a Christian to get involved or to speak out on an issue that involves a serious injustice? Like, I'm trying to think of an example where I see something terrible being done, or some kind of injustice being done on an individual level or a systematic level, whatever. Why would it be wrong for me in that case to speak out against it or to have a view on it?
Well, I think this is a really good question, but it still is not as simple as that for most people. And the reason is we can't seem to agree on what an injustice is.
Okay.
For example, a few years ago, a man died in police custody named George Floyd, right? When he died, there were a number of responses to what happened among Christians. One group said, well, he kind of got himself into that mess. So it's unfortunate that he died, but it is what it is. Essentially, you should have complied or whatever else you want to say, right? So they don't see it as a great injustice. They see it as an unfortunate event.
Sure.
Other people saw this as part of a greater theme on police treatment of vulnerable people, particularly people of color. And it was part of a broader story that has a deep and painful history in the United States. And so George Floyd became sort of a symbol of this brutality. So to them, it was a great injustice, whereas the other people, who were primarily not people of color, right, said this was not a great injustice at all. This guy was not a hero. He was, and then they would find all the reasons why he wasn't a very great guy. So when you ask that question, should we ever not speak on injustice? I think almost everyone would agree, yeah, we should speak out on injustice. The hairy part is, what is injustice? Like, who gets to decide the terminology there?
Right, yeah. So one of the big conflicts, one of the big tensions is like actually determining what is an injustice versus what is not, and therefore what is worth spending some time and energy on and what isn't.
Yes. And so to go back to that example of George Floyd, just because it impacted me at the time, I think I grew a lot through that experience. And one of the things is I started talking about injustice during that time on social media, and I may have shared this in a previous episode, but one of the things I got as feedback was, hey, you're a pastor, right? Focus on the gospel.
Okay. Ooh.
Focus on the gospel.
Ooh, there's a lot there. There's a
lot there, isn't there?
Yeah.
Because the implication is injustice in the world is not part of the gospel.
Absolutely.
And furthermore, in denominations like ours that really focus on the idea of prophecy, right, that God intervenes in human events and he can actually give us predictive prophecy. He can tell us what's going to happen. We can actually become quite passive, right? We know things are going to get bad, so why should we intervene? We're wasting our time. We should just share the gospel, not be involved in present matters of injustice, because as unfortunate as they are, they're not that big of a deal in the long run.
They're a distraction from what is supposedly the main thing, which is sharing the gospel.
That's it.
Yeah, okay. So that another implication there is that sharing the gospel, correct me if I'm wrong, it seems like that's implying, if you're saying don't get involved in those matters of injustice, just share the gospel, that sharing the gospel is just more a theoretical thing, right? Like if it touches on anything practical, now we're getting, I mean, it's not a bad thing, but like we're actually getting away from the main thing, which is to perhaps communicate the truth, right, of Jesus dying on the cross or whatever it might be.
Yeah. You know what I think I have found when I've done a lot of thinking on this? And again, I might as well reveal some of my bias. Like, I'm a trained social worker, so we focus on systems of injustice.
Yeah, you're incredibly biased. I've come to know that of you, James.
And we're not even talking about this episode, just in general. I'm a very biased person.
Yeah.
No, so like I spent a couple years studying how we have the laws and policies and histories that we have and how they can lead to injustice and sometimes how intentional it is. and also ways that we could work to change that, right? So that is something that I think is really in line with Christianity and with the gospel, but not everyone agrees with that. But to circle back around, I think that oftentimes church is very happy to focus on individual relief of injustice. For example, we see a homeless person on the street. Almost every Christian will agree universally, if we can help that person, it's our moral obligation to help that person.
Sure.
Right? To relieve their suffering in that moment. Some would say you should give them money. Some would say you shouldn't. But we should do something for them.
Yeah, if you can do something, do something.
If you can do something, do something. Almost everyone agrees with that. However, when we get to a bigger lens, what happened that this person became homeless? All right, well, now we're talking about access to mental health. Now we're talking about access to medical care. Now we're talking about education, family dynamics. We're talking about housing policies, right? Why is it so hard for this person to be in a house? What's the problem with their funding, right? Do they have an addiction that's not being treated?
Yeah.
Could they be treated?
Yeah. So it's getting towards causes and not just effects.
Exactly.
Right? Because there are unfortunate people who end up on the other side of maybe a broken system, and they their life circumstances are really tough.
Yeah.
And you can help that individual, right? And I think it's a good thing to do. But now you're saying yes, but that didn't just happen in a vacuum, right? These people just didn't end up in this by blind chance.
That's it.
They ended up on the wrong end of a system. So now let's turn the focus to the system and see, okay, can change be made there?
Yeah, if something is contributing to people becoming homeless on a regular basis, wouldn't it be our obligation to figure out what is contributing to that and to advocate for a better, more loving policy?
Yeah, okay, I see where you're going. Yep.
But for many people, they see that as becoming political and detracting from it's almost like we need to focus on people's souls, and if we can help them with their individual circumstances, great. But if we focus on anything larger than that,
anything bigger picture,
then we're no longer really focusing on the kingdom of heaven. We're focusing on the earth. That's the mentality.
Yeah. I see where you're going. Yeah, I've definitely come across that. I've definitely experienced that. It's an interesting perspective. Like I wonder what are the assumptions and the the ideas behind that. We're happy to do it on an individual level, but once we start to address systems, now this becomes you're getting too political. You're sliding into social justice, or I've heard some of those terms bandied about. I wonder what is beneath all of that. Yeah,
well, I think it often reveals our worldviews and our bias, right? That we might come from a place that we think is purely spiritual, but it's actually also political, right? The idea to not get involved, or the idea of individual responsibility is a political idea, right? To help your neighbor is great, but good things come to people who work for it. So if someone's poor, it's their fault, or if someone's being harmed, it's probably, there's nothing we can really do about it. So it's either this problem is too big and we don't have time to focus on it, or it's their fault that whatever's happening to them is happening to them, and so we shouldn't have any advocacy for change. And again, this is a big conversation in America right now, because we have the way that immigration is being enforced. Many people are supporting it, but many others are saying this is actually violent. It's wrong. It's not the correct thing. And the tension as a Christian is, well, what is my obligation?
Yeah. As you were just saying that, a thought came to my mind. I'm sure I've heard this before. I've heard people point to the example of Jesus and say Jesus wasn't political.
Yeah.
Right?
He never tried to overthrow the government.
He never tried to overthrow the government.
Give to Caesar what is Caesar's.
Yeah. That throwing out those kind of texts, and I think that is a powerful argument for some people. That if you look at the example of Jesus, supposedly, apparently, he was, non-political and he didn't get involved in systems. So neither should we. Yeah. Have you come across that?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think fair point to some extent, though I'm not sure that's actually true when you really dig down. He didn't, try to overthrow the political system. That's true. That wasn't his purpose. However, if you look at the interactions, who he interacted with and how was very political, extremely politically charged. To sit alone with a Samaritan woman who was your enemy, who was less than you in every way, and then to be there, a man and a woman in this place and actually have an equal conversation to some extent was a very politically charged thing to do.
Well, that's the thing. It's one thing to start an activist movement, right, where you're lobbying governments and these kind of things, right. But it's another. There are other ways of, I guess, resisting or pushing back in maybe slightly more indirectly against certain systems, and that could be by teaching principles that actually undermine certain systems that, if led to their logical conclusion, would create real action and real change. And maybe it's fair to say that around Jesus, a lot of what he taught certainly had massive implications for systemic change.
Yeah, I would agree with that. Though I would also say, in general, first of all, Jesus did not have time, right? Jesus had 3.5 years of ministry, active ministry.
And he had a certain purpose
and
that
he
he came
had
to
a very
accomplish.
specific purpose.
Yep.
And then after that, the question is, what is our responsibility as followers of Jesus based on what he taught? If we take what he teaches to its logical conclusion, what sort of world should we be living in?
I mean, I guess a great example, and maybe this is getting way ahead of ourselves, but an example might be the abolition of slavery, right? Now, in Scripture, right, in biblical times and during the spread of the early church, there weren't concerted efforts by the church to overthrow the institution of slavery, right?
No, that's actually the opposite. They were encouraging slavery. In fact, in American history, and then we'll circle back to your point, in American history, there was a time where they believed a Christian should not be enslaved, but you can enslave someone who is not a Christian.
Okay.
And so they actively resisted, as Christians, Christian slave owners, they actively resisted those people receiving the gospel because it would mess with their profit, right? Because if you're a Christian, I now have an obligation to treat you differently than I'm treating you now. And I don't really want to do that.
So let's not give that person the gospel.
And then someone had this bright idea. Oh, hold on. You can be a Christian and still be a slave.
Yeah.
And so all of a sudden, now you could introduce a form of the gospel that really was not a good news at all. It was, hey, be happy with your circumstances. You're actually super lucky to be in the position you're in because you know Jesus.
Yeah.
Even though you're in chains and you have to do exactly what I tell you to do.
Yeah, right.
Right. So anyway.
Great gospel there. So as I was just continuing my point, you don't see the abolition of slavery in biblical times, right? And you don't see the church really advocating for it on a universal basis, and that's putting it mildly. But I think most Christians today would agree that the abolition of slavery, what we're familiar with, the slave trade in America and those kind of things, most Christians would agree, maybe not all, but the vast majority of Christians today would agree that was simply an outflow of gospel principles. That was simply an outflow of biblical principles. It took a long time to germinate and to see real change. Yeah. But in hindsight, most Christians now look back and say, so glad that happened. That is completely in line with biblical principles. Yeah. Right?
Yeah. And I think that's another show for another day where we break into the idea that sometimes proof texting doesn't get us actually where we need to be with the gospel, that we have to go with some of these broader principles. Because if you proof text slavery in the Bible, it's a sketchy one. It's dodgy. But the principles are all there. They're all taught. Love, the value of a human, innate value of a human being.
And so
freedom.
I make that point to go, okay, Jesus certainly taught
everything.
He taught widely. And so much of what he taught, if you take it further, right, and you go, what does it look like to live consistently with this in the society in which I find myself? What are the kind of things that I'll be advocating for? What are the kind of injustices that I would be, going against? I think that's a fair point to make there. You're listening to Lo-Fi Faith with Mike and James.
Yeah. So to tie that together with what we were saying. In my perspective, a focus on the gospel has to include a focus on justice.
Okay.
And not just individual justice, but advocating for the type of world that Jesus would be proud of, right? Because if we don't do that, how are we really focusing on the gospel? If you don't actually want people to be healthy and cared for and provided for, right? And to ensure that they are not being taken advantage of, how are they going to listen to your gospel? What sort of gospel is that when you're not that concerned with the circumstances that they find themselves in?
Sure.
And so to bring this back around to the idea of prophecy, we say, well, time is too short to be focusing on this change.
Yeah, right.
Well, let's take the evidence of the prophets.
Okay.
Right? So give me some examples. What did the Old Testament prophets talk about?
Yeah, well, I mean, some that come to mind, think about Isaiah, Jeremiah, Amos. They seemed like, as you read, like Isaiah 1 comes to mind, right? There's a lot there about the terrible state that Israel were in. They were very religious, and they loved to have their feasts,
Yep.
and they loved to have their festivals and all their religious activities.
Yep.
But one thing that God, through the prophets, often criticized was the total lack of justice and righteousness that was actually going on within their own society and how they were interacting with other societies.
Yeah.
So the poor were not helped, the widows were not taken care of, all of these type of things. Meanwhile, though, that didn't impact their religiosity. They were uber religious and very happy to continue all those things. But God was saying this is massively hypocritical. Now, isn't the fact that the prophets would call out that as hypocrisy, doesn't that imply that the religion they were performing and they were believing should have had a practical effect on those issues in their society?
Not only should have, it was expected.
Yeah.
If you are going to be a religious people, it's going to come out in the policies and the ways that you treat people. Notice how you brought out Isaiah. That was not on an individual basis.
Yeah.
All throughout, it was on a national basis.
Corporate basis,
right?
yeah.
The way that you as a group of people are treating others is wrong.
Yeah.
It is hurting people. And because of that, no matter how religious and how churchy you think you are,
Yeah, that's it.
I actually have a problem with you, God is saying. That's pretty strong.
That's super strong.
Like, let's go to Isaiah 58.
Okay.
Because I really think this ties it together really well, right? Basically, in Isaiah chapter 58, there's an issue that the people have with God. They basically say, hey, we're doing everything you asked us to do, God. We're doing the festivals, we're doing the fasts, we're doing all of the things that you asked us to make us a righteous people.
It's all there in Leviticus. We're doing it.
We're going through all of we're ticking every box,
Yeah.
right? The behaviors are all there, God. But when we're praying, you're not answering our prayers. So they're basically like, why aren't you listening to us? What's up with that? Right? And so he says, all right, you want to hear? Let me explain. And, verse 2 says, day after day they seek me. They delight to know my ways, like a nation that does what is right and does not forsake the justice of their God. They ask me for righteous judgments. They delight in the nearness of God. So he's saying these people really are super, super righteous, super believers. And they say, why have we fasted and you've not seen? We've humbled ourselves, you're not noticing. We're still having problems, and I don't understand why, right? So then he's very clear on what's going on. Behold, on the day of your fast, you do as you please. Okay, what does that mean? You're being selfish? Well, he keeps going. You oppress all your workers.
Okay.
Whoa, okay.
Okay.
So this is actually about workers' rights?
Yep, we've got employment issues here.
Employment issues, okay? You fast with contention and strife, so it gets you're mistreating each other to strike viciously with your fist. You can't fast as you do today and expect your voice to be heard. That's verse 4, right? So then he says, the fast is not really about the behaviors. It's not just about putting the ash on your head and the sackcloth and then bowing your head and then going on about your lives. That's not what I consider to be acceptable. Going through the motions of religion is not going to fix the problem. So, again, this is prophecy. Verse 6 says, isn't this the fast that I have chosen? To break the chains of wickedness, to untie the cords of the yoke, to set the oppressed free and tear off every yoke. Isn't it to share your bread with the hungry, to bring the poor and homeless into your home, to clothe the naked when you see him, and not to turn away from your own flesh and blood? And then he promises, then if you do that, I'm gonna answer you. I'm gonna do all of these things. And it keeps going and keeps going. And this is just one example among many.
Yeah.
But I want to point out that this is not an individual only, right? Like you see a homeless person, you take care of them. You know, this is on a national basis. The way that you treat the least of these, the way that you treat the people around you matters. When you see a homeless person, feed them, yes. But when you see multiple homeless people, start asking the question about why. What is happening that society has failed them so much that they've gotten to this point?
It's like that old that kind of meme that floats around sometimes, where there's like the scene in like a bathroom or something, and there are a bunch of people mopping up the floor because there's water all over the floor, and they're just mopping furiously. And then you look closer and you see, okay, there is a sink with the tap on.
That's it.
And the sink is clogged up. And so obviously the water is slow. So instead of just mopping furiously, which is the effect, treat the cause and turn the damn tap off.
That's it. Yeah, absolutely. And so we are comfortable with mopping up the floor,
Yeah.
but we're very uncomfortable with recognizing the tap.
Yeah. Yeah.
And in the same way, right, when we're talking about immigration enforcement, the system of immigration in the United States is broken. Anyone who actually looks at the system of how to become a legal immigrant, it is a broken system. So whether or not people are in the country illegally, right, that's not really the only issue. The issue is, well, what is leading everybody to try to come to this place? And then why is it so difficult to come to this place? And are we doing things in a wise and thoughtful way? It doesn't mean you don't enforce laws, right? It means the way that you enforce laws should not invoke more trauma, should not be more painful, lacking empathy. And so when we actually identify the systems as a whole, we see, okay, prophetically, actually, we have an obligation to speak out on these issues. And I think about the slavery. Like when the abolition movement happened in the United States, it was a small group of people who were perceived to be very radical. Now, of course, it's a mainstream idea. Like, of course, we shouldn't have had slaves, right? That was a bad idea.
Yeah.
But back then, you were putting your entire reputation on the line, speaking out against these things. And I think there's always a desire for us to be comfortable. Like if it's not directly impacting us, it's much easier to just say, well, that's not really my thing.
Yeah, sure.
I'm going to be nice to the people in my circle, but I shouldn't really talk on this issue.
Maybe so. It's kind of coming from a place of privilege, perhaps.
100%.
Where, the issue is not relevant to you because it's not affecting you directly.
Yep.
Therefore, it's easy to say it's really just a distraction.
Yes, absolutely.
Probably the person who is actually suffering as a result of this system is not going to say the same thing, right?
No, they're
In
not.
fact, I can think of some great examples, which I won't go into right now.
And that's the whole point, right? If we really want to be Christ-like, prophetic, then we focus on people being harmed even when we're not directly impacted. And we speak clearly and boldly on subjects that might be considered political because we believe in our good conscience that it is the right thing to do. But I think that there is often a motivation, if we come from a place of privilege, to be quiet and to focus on what we consider the gospel. But that's a pretty empty gospel according to Isaiah 58 and these other passages, because it's a gospel without real compassion for our fellow man.
Okay, so you brought up Isaiah 58, which I think is pretty relevant based on what is stated there. Somebody might say, okay, yeah, but that was more of an Old Testament reality. New Testament, New Covenant. Jesus arrives. There's different things going on. Is this still an emphasis in the New Testament, or do things change there?
Yeah, I mean, we already talked about Jesus' teachings.
We did, yep.
Which were very much geared toward how we treat people. In fact, that's the measure, according to him, that's the measure of the judgment. It's how we treat people. Again, we could make the argument that that's just individual. Well, if you read through the book of Revelation, which we love to do, but we selectively read the book of Revelation.
Sure.
If you look at Babylon in Revelation, Babylon is a system, right? It is a system of oppression, not just a system of oppressive worship, which is what we tend to focus on. It's actually the trades and practices that are hurting people. It's the poor people crying aloud to God because of the injustice. That's what God is actually responding to.
Well, listen to this. I'm just looking at Revelation 18, right? This angel comes down from heaven and calls out with a mighty voice that Babylon has fallen. She's become the dwelling place for demons, etc. But then it goes on, all the kings of the earth have committed immorality with her, and the merchants of the earth have grown rich from the power of her luxurious living. Like there's economic implications here.
Big time.
Right? And there's a lot in this chapter, but that's just the first few verses. So yeah, Babylon is much more than just a religious system.
And when Babylon falls, everyone is shocked because it was all about richness. It was all about economics. That was unsustainable. It was built on a system that was taking from the least of these and giving to the most of these, which is a very consistent theme in the Bible, that if you exploit people to a certain extent, number one, it's unsustainable. Number two, it is morally wrong. And number three, God himself does not like you when you do that. So to be prophetic, even in the book of Revelation, should be to address inequalities and oppression and injustice.
Yeah. So prophecy and being interested in prophecy and promoting prophecy is not just about the kinds of prophecy seminars that we might be familiar with. We were talking about the identity of the beast and the identity of the little horn in Daniel and, getting into a lot of the theoretical kind of stuff. there is also seemingly an emphasis in Scripture, a prophetic emphasis in Scripture, on addressing unjust systems and not only looking at the cause or the effects of these systems, these unfortunate individuals that find themselves at the end point, but also the causes themselves and addressing those things.
Yeah, so I think as we wrap up this episode, I just do want to challenge our listeners, and again, myself, because I think I come from a place of quite a bit of privilege as well. I don't have to speak out on very many things because they're not impacting me. However, if we want to be Christ-like, if we want to be prophetic, then we will acknowledge that some systems are oppressive, some ways that we do things as countries take advantage of people, and we shouldn't be afraid to say that is wrong, even if we get labeled as political, because that is the correct thing to do. If somebody is taking advantage of somebody else, which is what makes God angry all throughout the Bible, then it should be something that we should speak on as well, not just in the individual, but on a larger basis as well.
I mean, I think that's a huge distraction from just preaching the gospel, which is. But you're fine for you to have that perspective, James.
I thank you. I appreciate you being willing to make space for me, and not listen to anything that we talked about for the last 30 minutes.
Oh, did we just address that point?
No, not at all.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
well,
yeah,
I'm glad.
no. Just stay in your little cocoon.
All right. Okay. Thank you guys for listening. We'll see you next time.
Thanks for hanging out with us on Lo-Fi Faith. If something resonated with you today, we'd love it if you shared the show with a friend.
You can catch up on past episodes at plains.org.nz and subscribe on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and YouTube, or wherever you get your podcasts.
We'll be back with a fresh episode in 2 weeks.
See you then.